Hey y'all, it's Stacy Karuba and I'm super excited to be here today walking you through how to handle a lease transaction. Much of the information I'm going to present to you is based on my experience with leases over the past 5 years. So I'm going to talk about things from the listing standpoint as well as when you're working with the lessee and some common mistakes to avoid, along with some frequently asked questions. So if you want to expand upon anything further or have any questions, you can always reach out to me directly. One thing I do want you to keep in mind as you watch this video is it's really important to remember that we are not to give legal advice to our clients. So if you feel like you're in a sticky situation and need additional guidance, I highly recommend reaching out to Pete or Everett to get those questions answered. Any listing appointment, not just a lease listing, you want to be prepared before you go. So what does that look like? Maybe running some comps to familiarize yourself with the area so you can make an accurate pricing recommendation and speak intelligently. I also usually input the listing into the MLS. That way I know what required fields are there and I can get my remaining questions answered when I go to the listing appointment. It's really important to remember, especially on your first face-to-face meeting with the client, that you discuss the agency relationship and make sure that they consent and are aware of dual agency. You also need to chat about the commission and make sure that they're aware of how the compensation works. Typically with a lease, it's 50 to 60% of the first full month's rent, but again, that is negotiable, so you can work a different payment out with your client. But it will have to be split with a cooperating member on the MLS. Finally, how is the property shown? Is the owner comfortable with a lockbox? Will you be able to use a super lockbox, which is recommended for safety reasons, and I usually suggest putting it in a discreet location on the property if possible? Or do they need you to use a combination lockbox for whatever reason? Maybe there's still a tenant, maybe they need to share a key with you, maybe there's a handyman. So you want to work those details out to make sure that everyone's on the same page. And finally, a last thing to consider with the listing appointment is photographs. Are you going to take professional photographs or are you going to do them on your own? I find that properties with professional photographs and a floor plan tend to lease or move faster than properties without, but there's not a lot of commission to be made in a lease transaction, and especially if you're just starting out, the bottom line is important, and so you want to make sure that you're making smart financial decisions. If you're going to photograph the property on your own, I highly recommend using another camera besides your cell phone, making sure that there's good lighting at the property to really make that wow impression. I definitely recommend utilizing showing time when listing the property on the MLS, whether the house is shown by appointment only, whether it's shown via lockbox, Supra, or combination. Showing time is such an efficient way to schedule appointments, to receive feedback, and to keep track of the activity happening on the property. I find that most of the showing appointments on my lease listings tend to be with unrepresented parties. So if that's the case for you, I think group showing appointments are a fantastic way to maximize your time and effort at the property, but also it keeps your safety in mind. So you're not meeting a random stranger alone at a vacant property. So a couple of key tips and tricks I've found through trial and error is, one, to do a group showing appointment. It really just helps make things a lot easier for you. Two, ask for some sort of picture ID. That way you know who you're meeting at the property. 9 times out of 10, someone is not going to have a problem sharing this with you, especially if they're serious about the property. They're going to have to send this to you anyway as part of the application process. But if you do get some pushback, I recommend reaching out to Pete or Everett to get a little guidance on how to soften that situation. My third suggestion is confirm, confirm, confirm. I cannot tell you how many times I have gone to a property when I've confirmed the appointment the day before and it's been a no-call, no-show. So group appointments will help kind of minimize wasting your time. But also, I suggest confirming the appointment the day before, the day of. You can never confirm too much, and I still have people that don't show up. So just know that that comes with the territory, but at least being proactive on your end will help make the best use of your time. Showing the property to a potential lessee that you're working with, it's always a great idea to research what the application process is. So a lot of listing agents will include this information in the agent remarks on the MLS as well as the attachments. If you're the listing agent, it's good to have clear guidelines for your application process. So this would be also on the MLS and the agent remarks and the attachments. But I also usually like to put a cover sheet on top of the applications that I display at the property or hand out at appointments that has very explicit instructions on how to complete the application and what the process is from there. So I'm going to walk you through what my process looks like, starting with the traditional information required on an application. So you can get an application already made on several different websites like Zillow that will ask for current residence information, employment information, banking info, as well as rental and personal references. Most applications also ask about eviction history, and they also mention pets. Additionally, most all of my owners require a credit check. So again, sites like Zillow, I know, do a one-stop shop where an applicant can apply directly on the website and complete the application. I use Experian Connect, I always have. It's worked well for me and it charges the applicant $14.95. I know TransUnion has a site called Smart Move, so you may want to shop around, see what you like before picking a credit check site. I also like to verify income and employment. So on my guidelines, I request that the applicant send a current pay stub and their current bank statement. Most of my owners require 3 times the rent as the monthly income. So even if the applicant is receiving funds, maybe unemployment benefits, maybe from student loans, the bank statement helps verify the actual money they have now, as well as their monthly income. And then last, and probably one of the more important elements, is getting a past rental reference. So talking to their current or previous landlord to find out did they have any issues with late payment or damage to the property is always a good gauge. But one thing I want to stress is to make sure that you treat all applicants the same. So if you require a credit check for one, you require a credit check for all. If you require income verification for one, income verification for all. So just really keep in mind that fair housing is important in all real estate transactions. But in my experience, I found that there's definitely some more potential liabilities with the leasing process. When working with the lessee, the first thing I like to do is get a safe search set up on the MLS for them. So I want to find out what's their max budget, where do they want to be, and what are they looking for in a home? What's the criteria? How many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, etc. Once my client finds a few properties that have caught in their eye, I'll schedule multiple appointments for us in one day to go see houses so that we're making the best use of our time and so that they can have it for comparison's sake. So before going to the appointment, I usually print out the MLS hot sheet or I'll bring an iPad so I have all the listing info readily available. I also reach out to the listing agent to confirm the appointment, even if it was scheduled via showing time. And I like to find out what's the application process. So a lot of times this is listed in the agent remarks on the MLS or in the attachments. But But a few other questions to keep in mind when working with lessees are the following. 1, what is the lease term that they're looking for? I find most properties are offered for 12 months. In the event that it's offered for less, I usually don't see any less than 3 months. I'll typically maybe see 6 months sprinkled in there, but sometimes there's also a discount for doing longer than a 12-month lease, so definitely ask about that. 2, is your client going to have any roommates living with them, someone helping to pay the rent, or are they going to have a guarantor or cosigner? So you'll want to check with them to make sure that they're qualified and able, and make sure that they fit within the requirements for the property. Number 3, what appliances are included? This is definitely a common question when dealing with leases, specifically regarding washers and dryers, dishwashers, and microwaves. So a lot of times the listing will have what appliances are included on the MLS, but it's good to verify. 4, what utilities are included? Another really common question. Some houses will include water or electric because there's only one meter, so you definitely want to find out. And if utilities are included, you want to clarify, does that include cable and or internet? A lot of times it doesn't, but it never hurts to ask. Number 5, parking. Is there off-street parking? Is there no parking? Reserved? Shared? These details really matter and can be make or break for your client. Number 6, pets. I'd say this is probably the most common question and the most commonly negotiated item when working with a lessee. So a lot of times the pet policy will be listed on the MLS along with a pet deposit, but you'll also find it's really common to see that an agent will advertise that pets will be approved on a case-by-case basis. So again, before showing the property, you want to make sure you're not wasting your time and that your client is not getting their hopes up on a property that maybe isn't going to work for them and that the owner's not willing to budge on that pet policy. And then finally, what are the funds needed to secure the property? Typically, the security deposit is going to be due immediately once the application is accepted, and that's usually going to be required as certified funds, so a cashier's check or money order. But a lot of owners are moving towards electronic payments, so if that is the case, I do suggest getting a copy of the Venmo, Zelle, PayPal payment screenshot for your files, because again, it's always best to be over-documented. So now that the property's leased, how do you get paid? If you're the listing agent, we'll request the cooperating broker's W-9. So the lessee will cut the check to Athena Real Estate. Once the check clears, Athena will process your commission payment and then also cut a check to the cooperating agent's brokerage. That agent's brokerage will then pay them directly. So as I just stated, the commission is paid after the first full month's rent is received. Some owners will have a slightly different process, but generally, most of the commission payments are deducted from the owner's proceeds of the first full month's rent. So while a lot of owners do prefer electronic payments nowadays via Venmo, Zelle, PayPal, we definitely prefer that the commission check is certified funds, so that's either a cashier's check or a money order. Athena Real Estate does accept personal checks, but it will take a few extra days to process your commission payment. Keeping good, strong, consistent records throughout all of your files is such an important component of being in the real estate industry. Keeping copies of as many pieces of information that will help you recall the transaction or document the activity throughout is definitely a best practice. So what do I mean by that? I like to keep copies of all the first month's rent, security deposit, gross commission checks, as well as my listing appointment notes, any email correspondence that's taken place in the transaction. It's a good idea to keep a copy of that. But one of my biggest and highest recommendations is to do a final walkthrough before the property is fully leased. So when you give the tenant the keys, or go with your client if you're representing the lessee, bring a move-in checklist. You can find these on Zillow and other websites that'll have different little things that you should keep in mind to document before you move into the property, to make sure that the person's going to get their security deposit back and that there's no miscommunication between the lessee and the lessor. So I recommend doing the move-in checklist, as well as taking photos and videos of the property that day and sending copies to everybody so that everyone's on the same page and there's a clear paper trail of the condition of the property. And then just keep in mind, real estate's a paperless industry nowadays, so keeping electronic copies of files is a-okay. So you upload your files to the Athena dashboard. You've got a copy potentially saved on your computer. I also suggest saving on the cloud and or an external hard drive. So good record keeping goes a long way, and it is never going to be a problem if you have too much information in your file. Common mistakes to avoid. So I know we've covered a lot of these items in the previous sections of this video, but just to recap, some common mistakes are not knowing the fair housing policies, making sure that you really are aware of what is permitted, what's not, what reasonable accommodations have to be made on both sides of the transaction. So familiarizing yourself with these policies to make sure that you are treating everyone equally and fairly, and also minimizing your liability. Another common mistake to avoid, especially on the listing side, is inputting inaccurate information into the MLS. So never make assumptions on what your owner may or may not permit, what the pet deposit may be. It's always best to under-promise and over-deliver. You never want to get into a situation where now you've put something in writing on the MLS that is not true, and there's another agent who is holding you to the letter of the law. So that can get a little sticky. So that's again why I suggest starting to input the listing before going to the listing appointment, so you can make sure what those required fields are, but also so you can familiarize yourself with some of those other details that might arise, and then you can have the most accurate info in the MLS. And finally, keeping good records. I know I sound like a broken record at this point, but you can never over-document. I highly recommend saving copies of the move-in checklist, photos of the property at the final walkthrough, copies of checks and payments, anything that's been signed by either party, as well as email correspondence. Keeping good records definitely goes a long way in this industry. Thank you so much for letting me provide this information to you. It's been my pleasure to walk you through how to handle leases, and if you ever want to chat further, I'd love to share my experience with you, so feel free to call, text, email me. I'm definitely happy to help and answer any questions you have. So let's review some of the key topics from this video. Number 1, and probably the most important, when in doubt, ask. Never make assumptions that you know how to do something or that you know the best way to handle it. Call Pete, call Everett, call another agent that's experienced, and get some guidance on how to best handle a situation. Number 2, keeping good records. Over-document, save everything that you can. You never know when you're going to need it. And keeping electronic copies is perfectly fine, but you want to make sure you have those files saved for at least 5 years. And number 3, having a strong application and showing process will make the whole transaction streamlined, and it'll make the best use of your time by having efficient processes in place. Number 4, professional looking marketing and photographs go a long way. So even if you're not going to spend the money to have professional photographs taken or professional marketing materials made, having a crisp, strong presentation definitely makes a wow impression and helps create a great brand recognition for you. So keep in mind, there's a reason that Athena agents defy the ordinary.